television producer, on-air personality, college dean, instructor, voiceover artist. Now she's a broadcast voice coach. She definitely doesn't get bored, I would imagine,
Nope.
because she's quite busy. And it's really exciting to have you here, Susan. What's going on?
I'm really happy to be here, Kevin. Looking forward to a really nice conversation about unlocking authentic voices, because that's what I do.
Yeah, very cool. Well, kick us off. Tell us a little bit more about you. That was, the bio, but who's Susan?
Who's Susan? She is someone who really loves to help other people. I really think this coaching thing is probably um, my calling. I really enjoyed teaching at the college level, and I think that's why I started this business. I was very lucky to have been blessed with a pretty good voice, and then a lot of singing lessons, voice acting, and that kind of thing allowed me to put together some lessons that I can pass along. So I like to say that what it took me 40 years to learn, I can teach you in about 4 hours. And I'm just delighted to do that. And I'm living in Charlotte, North Carolina. I spent most of my career in New York on Long Island, but sometimes working in New York City. So now I'm a Southern girl, and I still do voiceover work. And I sometimes like to say you can't shoot at a moving target. And I really do believe that people should always be open to reinvention. I always was. Look for an area in the business that I was in, broadcasting, that needed a solution. So twice I did that, once for public television. And then once I helped start a traffic reporting service in New York back in longer ago than I care to admit. It was the late 1970s. And so I love to find a problem and give it a solution.
Ooh, very cool. 'Cause I got lots of problems for you to work on, Susan. So I'm glad you're here. No, just kidding. But oh, well, really cool. I love really everything you shared, and it's such an interesting background because you pivoted so many times, and
Yep.
I love that. That's where you kind of started when you're talking about yourself. Because you know what, like we don't have to get married to a decision just because we were one way. Doesn't mean we have to continue to be so. So
And even if you think you're married to the decision may not be married to you. That's what happens in our business. So, yeah, the
yeah,
divorce, it happens. What can I tell you? So,
yeah.
always kind of have to have a little side chick or something. I don't know.
Yeah, that's pretty funny because like I'm gonna work here forever. They're like, yeah, you don't work here anymore, actually. So
Yeah, yeah,
yikes. Well,
exactly. I thought I would, when I got out of college, I really loved, I was going to do television, yeah, sure, but I really loved all news radio. And I thought that's what I was going to do for my whole entire life. So that was one of my first jobs. And the odd thing was that I had married my college sweetheart, and I worked on the news radio side of the company, and he worked on the television side, producing the evening newscasts. We never even saw each other. I worked morning, he worked evening. And when the folks up in payroll figured out that we had married and whatever, they said, well, we don't allow married people to work in the same building. Huh? Okay. So one of us had to go. And since I had worked there just a little less than Kevin had, my first husband's name was Kevin, um, I was asked to leave. What? So we both left. Ha ha. And we went to New York.
yeah,
Ha ha. So it
yeah.
worked out
Well,
okay.
yeah. Not for them. They lost some talent
Yeah,
times two.
we thought for sure the company would just fall apart without us. It
Yeah,
didn't.
they definitely spent more money training somebody else, though. They lost there for sure.
There
That
you go. I wonder if
that's
they
a
still have that rule. I don't think so.
yeah. Hopefully not. And I think when you get married to policy like that, that's really dangerous too. It's like, well, why? Because that's the way it is. Like,
Right.
oh,
There was no
oh
good reason.
yeah.
My
It's like,
bosses were horribly embarrassed. I'm sorry to have to tell you this, Susan, but because your husband works on the other side of the building at night, you got to go. What? Yeah.
that's wild.
And I wanted to get an attorney to take the case, for discrimination or whatever, just being stupid. And no attorney would touch it, saying, Susan, if we do, even if you won, you would be blacklisted in the industry forever. So you're better off just leaving. And I
Yeah,
hated doing it. I really wanted to fight the injustice, but it was not recommended as the solution to chase.
yeah, but it probably obviously worked out better for you anyways to,
Yes,
take a
it
step
did.
in a new direction. So
Yes, it
that's
did.
really good. It's like, we have resistance or acceptance as our two options, and one creates
That's
more
right.
resistance and one creates flow. So you
There
got to
you go. I
choose.
like that.
Yeah, choose how you want to live. So, do you
That's
have
right.
any, before we jump into all your genius around voice and owning your voice and the power that comes with that? I was just curious if you have any favorite on-air disaster stories you'd like to share, because those
Oh
are always
God.
the fun
Yeah.
videos to watch on.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I have two of them. The best one was in television. I had taken my first TV job down in West Palm Beach, Florida, and I was a general assignment reporter, and I was all of 22 or 22. And one day I happened to muse out loud to no one in particular. And I said, wow, I wonder what it would be like to do the weather. Well, one of our weekend weather casters, his first name was Glenn, don't remember the last name, overheard me just talk about that. And he said, you want to do the weather? I said, yeah, I thought that might be fun. Okay, great, 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 great. I think that was a Wednesday. By Saturday night, I was doing the weather. Well, like, okay, well, I'm not, this was 1978. You didn't have to be a meteorologist. You could just do the weather. And in fact, the weekday 6 o'clock weather person at the station in West Palm Beach was a weather girl. She wore short skirts and white vinyl boots and was a weather girl. I didn't kind of quite go that route, but I remember saying to Glenn, okay, I don't know how to do this. What should I do? And he wrote something down on a piece of paper and he folded it up and he handed it to me. And I said, what's this? He said, it's the inside number to the National Weather Service in Miami. That's all you're going to need. Oh, okay. So fine. We managed and I did it. And there at the time, because no one is really from Florida. If you live in South Florida, you're from somewhere else around the country. So really what you do is you do a national weather forecast. So I was about 3 or 4 months in. So I was pretty steady. And technology back then wasn't what it is now. So our national weather map was literally on a big board that somebody had to push from behind the set, push up a bar, and then the national map would lower behind me. And all the symbols, the sunshines, the cold front, the warm front, the storm clouds, they were all magnets. And I would set them up before each weathercast and then, have my script and how I talk about this, that, and the other thing. Well, one weekend we had a new regular news anchor who was a former baseball player. And you always need somebody to be behind the set to lower the national map. He said, "Oh, I'll do it. I'll do it." And he gets behind there, and he hadn't practiced. So when I said, "Let's take a look at the national map," or whatever I said, and he pushed with all his might this bar up, and the map came down all right at a speed faster than light. And
Hmm,
when it stopped and jolted, all the weather symbols fell off, all of them.
perfect.
It was. And of course, every curse word I knew was running through my head, but the only thing I said was, oh, good grief. Okay. So the show must go on. So I managed to, well, imagine a warm front here and it's moving through the Ohio Valley and whatever. And sunshine today for the Fort Lauderdale area. But for those of you who are who have friends up in New York, they've got some stormy skies, whatever. And I made it work. And the next part of the weather cast was, we call it the temperature roll. And I would say, oh, let's take a look at the temperatures around the country. And then this piece of tape would roll. So I'm trying to finish up this made up forecast. And as I'm thinking about what had just happened, I'm starting to lose it. I'm going to burst out laughing any minute now. So I got myself all the way through it. Let's take a look at the temperatures around the country. And I collapsed to the floor in hysterics. The director, opens the key and he is laughing in hysterics. Tears are running down everybody's eyes. Well, managed to pull myself together, finished the weather forecast, walked into the newsroom, and the hotline was ringing. Well, that's never good. That's the general manager. And I pick up the hotline, and all I hear is laughing, which was great. So they said, the proverbial they said, that little piece of tape made it to the correspondence dinner in Washington that year. They used to do a blooper reel.
Yeah.
I don't believe them. I've never been able to find it, and I've looked. But that was one of my best disasters that was easily handled, but just very funny. And the show goes on. Yeah. And I think viewers are very forgiving.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and it's such a good illustration too of the point that, like, life doesn't have to be taken that seriously, right? You know what?
Nope.
Like, we make mistakes. Like, most of our life is, trial and error. And, sometimes there's more error than, success. And like, if you look for it to be painful, it's going to be painful. And you know what? Like, if you can't take a joke, life's going to be really hard.
Right. And the news anchor was so apologetic. I mean, that's all right. No worries.
Yeah. That's what you get for putting a dude in charge of something that needs grace, right?
Particularly a baseball player, really. Yeah. Right. We should have practiced once or twice. You don't have to put all your strength into that, really. You don't. But
we're not lifting a car off a child back here. We're just putting this light map up.
The map just needs to lower and look lovely.
That's awesome.
Didn't happen.
Well, shout out to the overstrong baseball player.
Wherever he may be. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. That's amazing. I want to shift gears and talk a little bit about your coaching practice. So as a broadcast voice coach, if somebody asks you to describe that to them, could you help us understand what that is and who you serve?
Sure. Primarily, I work with anchors and reporters, the occasional sports guy, occasionally a meteorologist, to uncover their authentic voices, particularly for young women, but even for some gentlemen who create a voice, something that they think they should sound like. I started this when I'd be flipping around the channels, and young reporters and anchors these days, the reporters, many of them have to go out by themselves. They shoot, they edit, they write, they voice, they do the whole thing. And the one thing that isn't taught, I don't think so much in journalism classes anymore, is using a very strong, bold, authentic voice. Sure, they've basically learned how to write. They can shoot beautifully. Everybody I've worked with is a marvelous photographer, but somehow the voice got lost in the shuffle. So, and I personally find that I'm not going to watch you if I don't like the tenor or pitch or sound of your voice. It sort of grates on me. So I decided, I guess it's about not quite a year and a half ago, that I was going to hang out my shingle and I was going to be a broadcast voice coach. There aren't many of us out there. There are certainly companies who have TV coaches. I don't care how your hair looks. I only care how you sound. So usually it's young women, but occasionally young men will come to me because they realize their voice isn't as developed as it could be, or their writing could use a little bit of help, because you can't address voice without addressing writing, at least in broadcast. So those are the people I generally help, but I have also worked with ministers with regard to pitch and showing them what their audience, what the people in the pews don't have. For example, if you're in the back of the church, you might not see the minister's lips move. And when we have a conversation, watching lips fills in psychological gaps. And it's very important to understanding what someone is saying, whether we recognize it or not. Now, we all have just done 2.5 years in masks, and that muffled our voices, but it also didn't allow us to watch lips. So ministers need to be aware of that. College professors need to be aware of that. they need slowed down because you have practiced that script and you want to deliver that sermon. But I don't know what's coming next. Could you give me a minute to catch up? Same thing with reporters. They race through their scripts thinking that they have to get in all this information. But if I start to get confused and my eyes glaze over early on, you'll have lost me. So really what I do is help them vocally, but also allow them to see and hear what their audiences see and hear. And for them, that can be very eye-opening. And in working with a lot of young women, trying to understand why they don't access their natural, authentic voice, which has to come from the bottom of your diaphragm. Now, in general, most of us don't do it. You do it, Kevin, because you're like this. So for you, I think that is your natural voice. But a lot of women particularly, they're speaking quickly, they breathe shallowly, and they rely on a voice that they had as children and young girls. And what I've come to learn is they don't let go of that girlish, Barbie doll, breathy, vocal tone because it got them what they wanted, got them through a dysfunctional family, somehow served in a way in early relationships with partners. So when we unpack that a little bit about why, when I show them their authentic voice, they're generally very surprised. They didn't know it was down there. And once you can master that, and through breath work, it's a process. It's like any other sport or dancing. You have to practice it. Some women have come to me with tears in their eyes, and they'll say, you don't know how healing that was for them to actually speak from their area of power, their area of truth, their authentic selves. They were always doing or being something else for somebody else. And even the men who, and women too, they come into the business and they grew up watching certain newscasters, or it's just in their head. What should a newscaster sound like? What does an anchor sound like? No, you need to sound like you. How about an authentic you? You don't need to imitate or mimic anybody. And in fact, the whole business is changing toward a more authentic, 15 and 20 years ago, anchors, I like to say they sing in a cadence, and it wouldn't matter whether they're talking about a St. Patrick's Day parade or an explosion at City Hall. That singing cadence just happens. That's not true anymore. Since 9/11 and coming forward for all kinds of reasons, it's important for news people to be transparent as a matter of trust. And one of the things that starts that is your tone of voice, your choice of words, who you are talking to, how you connect. Used to be you didn't have to connect with your audience in broadcast. Talk radio showed us otherwise. Podcasting shows us otherwise. And TV news is catching on.
Yeah, I think that's a really cool point you just made, because in the past, I mean, you watched the news, it wasn't a choice, or
Right.
even a question, right? That's what you
Right.
did.
It was in front of you. You had a couple of choices. And in the last 25 years, those choices have expanded. And now everybody fights for the eyeballs and the ears. And then the audience has to figure out what's true and what's not.
Yeah. So I want to ask about tips for building a more authentic voice. Obviously, that's the natural segue. But before you go into that, I was curious, when you help somebody, and you mentioned, women specifically coming to you and just being, overwhelmed with joy, or, feeling really good about just finding their truth, or, their most authentic self. And I totally understand that. So my question is, when that gets better, how I do anything is how I do everything. And so if I own my voice, speaking more powerfully, does that transition into the writing pretty automatically? The writing gets better too as a result?
Sometimes what does get better immediately is confidence begins to grow. And because when you are speaking authentically, you're feeling pretty good about, a reporter on every story has to become the expert and to share it with their viewers. So if they can do it from a point of authentic voice, they're feeling pretty confident. The writing, you're right. And not only are they feeling a little bit more confident, but they're connecting with the audience, being more conversational. I always say it is respectful to talk to your audience as they talk. And coming out of college, even though journalism classes tried to teach you short sentences and active verbs and the usual, it's just hard to do because coming up through school, your college entrance essay, the SAT tests, every English exam or history exam you ever took, the more you wrote, you thought you were smarter. In broadcast, the opposite true. The less you write makes you smarter. So it starts the process of being a better writer, but no, writing is its own little thing. And I spend a good deal of time on that too. I like to say, write it like a fifth grader, deliver it like a college professor.
So what? Oh, you were talking about cadence a second ago and just helping people slow down. But what about the other way? Is it sometimes necessary to get people to pick it up a little bit? Because some people that I've worked with, especially in the leadership space, they read somewhere in a book that, powerful leaders pause. And so they're doing this like extra awkward pause between like every phrase. And it's like, you're leaning forward, like you want to pull the words out. Like, just give me the words,
That's interesting. No, I don't generally have that problem. Because reporters just tend to want to get through all that information that they work all day on a story. And the producer says, okay, I'll give you a minute 30. Well, you've been out there for hours and you know everything about this story from stem to stern, and I want a minute 30 or less. So it's a matter of editing and it's a matter of making good choices. But I don't generally have that problem. I have to get young reporters to pause, to breathe and reset their breath and bring their pitch back down, but to allow the audience to sort of catch up with what you just said before you launch into what you're about. So I almost never have that problem. No.
Yeah. No,
Awkward pauses. I wish.
Yeah, it was definitely not a problem for me. Like talk too slow. I know that much. Okay, cool. Well, tell us some more tips on really helping, somebody's listening find their authentic pitch and tone in addition to just calling you and working with you, because that's how they're going to go further faster. But where could they get started today?
It's so easy. And it's something I learned taking singing lessons. Now, I would not have taken singing lessons. I loved to do regional theater back in the day on Long Island. And I loved to be in musicals or straight plays and put me in the chorus, give me a couple of lines, I'm your girl. Well, I got cast in the musical Footloose as one of the mothers. And there is a duet between the mothers. Wait, you want me to sing a duet? Well, yeah. And you want me to do the alto part? I'm not even doing the melody? Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. All right. I had 6 weeks to get this together. So I found a wonderful teacher and she taught me so much about singing, and which translates so beautifully into voice for anything. And the coolest thing I ever learned from her is there is a body part associated with your best pitch and helping you to breathe easily from your belly, and you'll never guess that body part. Want to take a stab?
Sure.
I bet you'll
about
hit it.
your your bottom.
No, not well. Your bottom does figure into it a little if you're sitting, but nope, that's not. But you're kind of on the right path. That body part is your shoulders. If you need to, let's say you're called up in front of a PTA meeting suddenly to answer a question or give an opinion. So you get up there and you stand in front of that microphone. If you do nothing more than drop your shoulders, because what that does, and it does pull the weight of your body down through the bottom of your feet, or if you were seated, it puts your weight down through your butt so you weren't too far off. It's like a secondary thing. But if you lower your shoulders and then kind of slowly, not too slowly, take in a nice breath in through your mouth and make sure you're filling your diaphragm, that muscle that's attached to the bottom of your rib cage that helps to move muscles in your rib cage and get air into your lungs. If you can pull that air, be very mindful that it's going down into your diaphragm, and you go to start your answer or your opinion, chances are, if you're doing that right, drop those shoulders, you won't start high pitched, I'm pretty sure, and you'll probably do a pretty good job in speaking in your natural pitch. That was one of the coolest things I ever learned. Now, there's more around that involves a little bit of yogic breathing, some other things, for singing that I can share. But the simplest tip is just drop your shoulders and breathe.
Yeah, I think that is a pretty good tip for just about any situation, because
Just about.
when you get nervous, you stop breathing deep, and like your brain thinks you're dying because it's not getting the oxygen, and you're not going to create. You're just going to react.
And for anchors, they're breathing so shallowly, they hear that little voice in their brain screaming, "You don't have enough air to finish the sentence. You don't have enough air to finish the sentence." Well, I can teach you how to avoid that. You activate the parasympathetic nervous system through breath, and then it quiets your nervous system, which is responsible for triggering all those hormones and chemicals, in your heart and in your liver and in your spleen and in your hypothalamus and in your thyroid, wherever. So breathing, yogic breathing, just quiets those miserable messages. And yogic breathing will certainly take the nerves. Everybody has nerves when you're speaking in front of people or on camera, whatever. But it helps all those butterflies to fly in formation in your belly. If you weren't nervous, there'd be something really wrong with you.
Yeah, but I mean, the nerves are good. I mean, because you want to be challenged, and obviously you want to have skill, because that's how you find flow.
Absolutely true. That was deep. Explain further.
Sure. Like peak performance, right? Peak states where the limitations drop away, right? And we get these really cool insights and just really high levels of performance, like AKA flow or being in the zone. Like there's certain triggers, the word you used, and one of the triggers is like a high challenge to skills ratio, meaning I had to have some skill, but it needs to be a little bit more challenging than my skill. Because if it's too easy, I don't really care that much. And if it's too hard, then fear like swamps the system, like you were just talking about, and like cortisol especially. And then like in flow, it's so powerful though, because we get transient hypofrontality, which is a super fancy way of saying the front part of your brain shuts down. And that's where the inner critic lives, the one that tells you you're not good enough, smart enough, fast enough, young enough, not going to have enough air. And really powerful, because along with the inner critic going away, self-consciousness goes away. And really beautiful things start to happen. And that's where you get that really elite performance.
Yeah. And you always know when you've done it. I mean, anchors and reporters can come off the set and go, "Yeah, I nailed that one." I don't think it happens very often, because a newscast is such a fluid thing that changes and it never goes as you rehearsed it, and the opportunity for things to go wrong are huge. So, but yeah, when you nail it, or when you hit just the right note, because reporters get to pre-record their stories. So when we get to reporting 301 as opposed to reporting 101, there are nuances and beautiful things you can do with the tone of your voice. You'll always be in the same area of pitch, but tone colors the words, and tone comes from your head and your heart, whereas the pitch comes up from your diaphragm. But being able to, because we story tell, that's what we do. We don't read a script, we story tell. So to show a reporter how they can use just the right literal tone of voice to lead into a voice cut or coming out of a voice cut, that is so satisfying, so satisfying.
Yeah, I bet. And I bet it's a pretty good game changer for them too. Just these tiny tweaks that lead to pretty good results on the back end.
Yes. And when you're going to put together, I work with young people who are in their first or second, sometimes third markets, who are looking to move up. And on your reel, that's what news directors see. The average audience member might not see or hear it. Maybe your own news director might not see or hear it, but somebody who's going to hire you is going to see or hear it because they look for that stuff.
Well, what tips for strengthening the voice, in addition to a lot of the stuff you just walked through, would you suggest?
Strengthening the voice. Okay. Oh, I don't get that question a lot. I think doing the yogic breathing, which my recipe for that is, I'll teach you the posture. And then I would say, okay, if you're really serious. And when I was learning to do this duet, Elaine said, my voice teacher, if you're really serious about this, Elaine, I'm serious. I have 6 weeks. Of course, I'm serious. She said, take 4 Post-it notes, and on it you will write, I will notice my breath. And they go, your steering wheel, your computer, your bathroom mirror, and your refrigerator. And every time you pass the Post-it note, stop. You mentioned the zone. What I teach people to do is to kind of get into a zone. Do the posture thing, start to breathe, and just do it for a minute. And I'll do the math for you. Breathing in on 4 and out on 6. I do out on 6 because that teaches the brain you're not going to run out of air. That's 6 breaths. Just do 6 and then go on about the rest of your day till you pass another Post-it note. It's a wonderful thing to do before you go to sleep to try to relax you. Dentist office, doctor's appointments, great place to practice the breath because it really does counteract your central nervous system. It allows your parasympathetic nervous system to really calm you down. And now it's not going to work perfectly, but it's going to help. But it's a practice. And so the more you do it, the better you're going to do it. And the easier you're going to be able to do it when called to do it in a heartbeat. So that, and since your diaphragm is a muscle, that practice strengthens your muscle. Now, I often say to my clients, speak from your diaphragm and speak boldly. I always use the word boldly, not loudly. I did not say loudly. I said boldly, as a way of extending your voice, not in a loud way, but in a very room commanding way, that you're speaking in your best pitch and people are going to listen. That's your job, to make people listen. So speaking boldly and remembering to do that. I've had particularly, again, young women who had those girlish voices where we made the decision, the practical decision, not just to do this new authentic voice, which, by the way, I'm not teaching you anything that's false. I'm not creating something. It's always been there. You just never knew it. So when you use that authentic voice all the time, some women have made the decision that they're just going to do that all the time, certainly in the newsroom, certainly in an interview situation, certainly in speaking with someone of authority or whatever, but also speaking with your partner, speaking with your family, with your children. Authentic voices work in every situation. I've worked with I've worked with some people who are communications specialists at different companies, and now everybody is on Zoom. So everybody's on TV. And they had this one particular young woman who was very bright, and she was a wonderful asset to their communications team. But the voice didn't match the smart, Now, you could say, we all need to accept everybody for who we are. And why do you need to make her sound different? I'm not making her sound different. I'm giving her some tools to sound and more. Yeah, sure. The obvious answer is more professional. But it can trickle into other areas of your life. And I'm not trying to change anybody. And I don't want to say that I'll change her name, Tammy, wasn't a great girl. She is. But in a professional sense, if I can help you master speaking on Zoom, doing that meeting, then that's just good for you. And they were very pleased. And she was really tickled. She also didn't know because you have to learn to hear it back. If you don't use it, you have to use it to hear it. And it always surprises people. Oh, I didn't know I could do that. Well, yeah, you can. And it's a beautiful thing. It does make your voice more pleasant. Whether you like that or not, it does. A deeper tone is generally a more pleasant tone. When you think about warning sounds rather, they're sirens, they're high-pitched. Well, high-pitched voices can be always not pleasant to listen to, and you don't want to turn off your audience. You want to gain trust. You want them to understand that you're putting forth good information. You want them to stay with you. And if the pitch of your voice is turning them off, and I can help you with that, more power to both of us.
Yeah, if you're sounding like a tea kettle, that may turn people off a little bit.
I'm going to steal that one. Tea kettle, exactly.
Yeah. I mean, because we all run to turn that off because it's unpleasant, right? We don't sit there and hang out with it and let it screech in our ear. Oh, this sounds amazing.
And right. And it makes for better conversation. People absorb better what you're speaking about. So many times I'll say to a reporter, who has written these long sentences and she's rushing through it, and blah, blah. So she'll rehearse it before we fix it, and I'll say, really, do you think the average viewer could spit back to you what you just said? And she'll shake her head. You must run into that with the people in business you work with. I mean, if you're a neurosurgeon talking to other neurosurgeons, have at it. But if you're a neurosurgeon speaking to donors to your hospital, you have to have the right conversation going.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's so important because I think tone's so overlooked. And, if you make people feel like you're talking down to them, there's definitely no connection there, and they're definitely not going to trust you. And if people don't feel safe, they're not going to be vulnerable. And if they're not being vulnerable, they're not going to create whatever you're looking to create together because they're trying to protect themselves. It's so simple, but it's not necessarily easy.
How do you teach vulnerability?
Well, for one, just model it. I think that's really important because people are, especially in a coaching situation, if I'm not being the change I want to see, then that's not super authentic in the first place. But really, I think it's like the influence equation, right? It's trust, connection, then we share vision that people will co-create, right? But most people try to share vision first, like this is where we're going. And if there's not like a connection built on trust, then, people just don't resonate and they're not going to move not nearly as quickly as they could or effectively. And so I think like being authentic, number one, being who you say you are is a really great way to teach people how to be vulnerable. Like you said, being true to yourself, your authentic voice, like that's so crucial. And being consistent, because if I show up one day and I'm drunk and the next day I'm not, and then the next day I'm screaming, it's like very confusing. And people won't be vulnerable around you. And if I'm making it all about me, like that doesn't show that what's important to me is important to you. And it takes vulnerability to reach out and connect with another human.
And anchors and reporters have to be reminded, I think, just as perhaps CEOs and higher ups in companies need to be reminded that sometimes, no, in fact, not sometimes, it isn't about you. It isn't. It's about your audience. It's about the people you work for. And I like to remind my reporters that, in a way, by you explaining a story, or you having access to an interview or access to a particular place where you are literally bringing your viewers in to see them, first of all, that's a big responsibility. Secondly, and I think I just lost my train of thought, but you have to do it in a way that connects with them and is real to them. And if you are doing it from an authentic voice, which is where confidence begins to build, I guess confidence allows for vulnerability too, because all right, this is my real voice, and I'm going to be real with you about other parts of my life. Or not that reporters do that, but I think your viewer has to see that you're not somebody who's sing-songy, and you're not somebody who doesn't care, or you're not delivering something that's very flat, or that you're not delivering something that's overly dramatic either. That's an equally horrific sin when you get too far dramatic, because that's not real.
Yeah.
At all.
I think that's a good point. And I think just really not putting a lot of worry or any worry into what other people think is really important too. Because, like if I'm worried about what you think constantly, like that's really dangerous because, I'm pandering to, some way I think I should be. And if I'm really just coming from my truth, things usually work out pretty well. Doesn't mean I can't improve. But man, so good. I'm so interested to learn from you today. I'm so glad that you came on to share with us.
Well,
But
thank you. Thank you. It's been fun. We've touched on some things that I don't normally get the opportunity to talk about. And thank you for sharing too. The tea kettle, I'm taking that with me.
Yeah,
That's where I'm going.
That's both of ours. We'll share it. So
okay, thank you.
But I got a couple of questions I like to ask all the folks who come through here. I want to make sure people know where to go to find you too. So 2 quick questions, and then we'll give them how to connect with you. But a favorite book to read, recommend, or give away?
Oh, a favorite book to read or give away. That's a tough one. Favorite book to read or give away. Gosh, I spend so much, at the moment I back up my coaching with, books written by people in our industry. And, Ann Utterback is the mother of TV broadcasting. So certainly her books are great, but
Okay.
A book I would give away. Gosh, Kevin, I can't think of one. I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to make it up.
Okay. Well, I won't check the mailbox waiting on a book from you then.
Don't.
No, I wasn't anyways. That's just a joke. Okay, no problem. What does freedom mean to you here on the Unlock Your Freedom podcast?
Okay. The freedom to be authentically who you are at all times. And as you pointed out, try not to care about what others think. And, so much of all of this comes with age. It's hard being 27 and not worrying about the future and not worrying about what other people think and other people who seem to have control over your life. Freedom comes from thinking you have more agency than you do and to step into it. Try it. What's the worst that could happen? You might get knocked down, but you'll live. What a great
word. Agency. Yeah, that's a very underutilized word. And if that doesn't immediately stand out to what that means, ask my friend Google. It'll tell you all about it. It's a great word. Own it. Last question. Where can people go to learn more about you and connect and engage with you?
Well, my website is called Susan Murphy Vosot, VOSOT.com. And VOSOT is broadcast shorthand for voiceover sound on tape, which if you see an anchor start a story and then it goes, B-roll is on top of her and she's just reading words, that's a VOSOT. It doesn't have any voice cuts in it, but it's just a story that has B-roll on top of it. That's a VOSOT. I'm also on LinkedIn. Just go Susan Murphy Voice Coach. There's only one of me. And those are the places you can find me. And I've enjoyed being able to do what I do via Zoom. If we hadn't had the pandemic, I'm not so sure I could have hung out that shingle. But anybody who wants to uncover their authentic voice in a very gentle way and in a very supportive and encouraging way. I'd be delighted to help. And that's why I love to do these podcasts and just to talk about the dropped shoulders. I mean, that can do so much for you. It relaxes all the muscles into your neck and jaw, and that's why it works.
That's really cool. So many good tips. But definitely, you guys, if something Susan said stood out to you, definitely reach out and connect with her. She's just a really brilliant and graceful woman. So I think
Thank
she
you.
could take you to some cool places. But thanks for being here and
Yeah.
sharing with us.
I'll happily come back anytime, Kevin.
So thanks. And thanks you guys for making it to the end with us. If you found some value, please share this out with your friends who may benefit from this as well. We'll see y'all next time on the Unlock Your Freedom podcast.